So, I mean, I'm just going to use these terms very loosely. A signing ceremony is happening tomorrow to annex parts of Ukraine. What exactly are we expecting to see, Jim?
Well, we'll probably see a lot of pomp and circumstance as they try to have ceremony fill the void left by reality, which is it was a sham vote, as you said. And probably the most the Russians can do to pump up what they did is to have a lot of pomp and ceremony and signing, handing out pens and cooking champagne. But that's about as far as it goes.
Well, how do we know about how these elections were taking place? Because, of course, we all expected to see these figures of 98, 97% pass rates.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure who's left there to vote because so many people have voted with their feet and got out of those areas. That's the first thing. Second thing is that if people did answer the door, they found themselves face to face with a Russian and a Russian soldier with a bayonet. So if they voted what they were told to vote, not because they wanted to do that, but because they faced an alternative that was not very pleasant. So whether it's turnout or whether it's what they voted for, it makes sense. It's a complete fake.
And of course, most of the world don't believe the results as it stands either. So why do the Russians take this approach? Is it purely the political view that they can then claim the territory and then they can say it's theirs, so if you attack it, you're attacking our territory?
Well, that's what people seem to think. And for all of us watching from the outside, there's no rationality for this. It's all a kabuki theater. And so it seems to be that in the Kremlin, there's a thought there that this is going to mean something to the Russian people, that Putin and his people can make a better case to the Russian people on why they're there, that there's been a vote, and maybe the Russian people they've been fed this propaganda, and so they really think there was a vote. And when Putin says they're part of us now, and we're going to go defend them, and we're going to, threaten anyone who dares oppose us with nuclear weapons, maybe he feels the Russian people think that. But I tell you, watching all of those people leaving, all those Russians leaving to avoid mobilization, it seems to me the Russian people are getting the truth about what's happening there from somewhere. Because they're certainly voting themselves as well, and they're voting with their feet.
Jim, do you think that this change in circumstance by Russia could change the war on the ground, the fighting itself?
No, I do not at all. I think Putin also is casting his eyes at Europe, at the UK, at the US. He's thinking that. The threats of a nuclear weapon, the threats that if you attack what is now part of Russia, you will pay a big price. I think he feels that he can scare everyone. He feels that there are people in Europe, in UK, in the US that he can reach by these kinds of tactics. And he's absolutely wrong. There's quite a delusion there within the Kremlin, thinking that either the Russian people or people in the West are going to be swayed by these kinds of things. So in terms of fighting on the ground, it's a matter of keep moving forward, keep supplying the Ukraine forces with ammunition and with the HIMARS systems and the other things that the UK and the US are providing. That's what we have to do. We can't be deterred or believe any of this propaganda being pumped out of the Kremlin. Yeah. I don't think the Russian people believe it either.
Jim, you mentioned those long lines that we've seen these pictures of as people, a lot of them, of course, fighting age, heading towards the borders, particularly in Scandinavia, in Finland. How much pressure do you think that puts internally in the Kremlin on people who just might, stand up and speak up against President Putin?
I think it puts a lot of pressure on the Kremlin, and I think that's one of the reasons they're pushing hard on this referendum is they need any tool they can to try to convince people that what they're doing is right and patriotic and should be supported by the Russian people. And I believe Putin, who saw the problems during Chechnya, he was involved in the whole Chechnya fighting a number of years ago, and you had a rise among the Russian mothers who were having body bags sent back with their Russian soldiers dead in them. And I think he's afraid of things similar. So he's seeing right now his worst nightmare, which is domestic problems in Russia. in the form that this time of these men who are trying to escape being mobilized.
Yeah, it's very difficult, though, isn't it, to get a clear picture of the sentiments of the Russian people and how they feel, and also it's difficult to get an idea of how much they've changed their opinion from the beginnings of the war back on the February 23rd to now in late September.
Well, that's right. I think we're starting to see now that as the war gets closer to the person in the street, if their son is being mobilized, or their neighbor or their cousins, all of a sudden what was a far off war is becoming close to home, and they're also hearing more and more from those who are calling back to their parents and saying this is a messed up situation here in Ukraine, or in the mobilization center, or trying to get trained. There's a lot of talk coming back into the Russian public from these young men who are being sent out, who are saying things are messed up. So this kind of thing is going to eat away and really put a lot of pressure on Putin to try to make the case that what they're doing is patriotic and that they had better do it, or they'll face consequences. So domestic pressure for sure is ramping up on Putin, and the problem for all of us on the outside is we don't know how he's going to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, 7 months on, it's fascinating to try and to get an insight about how that domestic pressure is persuading people inside the Kremlin. Do you think now there are people actually inside the Kremlin who are on the verge of speaking up to the president, or is there any way we can know that?
Yeah. Well, I think we have seen some strange occurrences of people being pushed out of windows.
Yes.
Over the past month or so, we are seeing oligarchs and others have an untimely end. So I think there's probably a feeling by Putin and his close advisors that there's problems among that Russian elite that is dependent on Putin for money and this type of thing. And so, we were just talking about domestic pressure on the street. Well, this is another kind of pressure that's almost as bad for Putin, and that's his inner circle beginning to doubt him because they depend on him for their welfare. And if suddenly he's looking weak and he's looking like he will be putting into peril the oligarchs, either themselves or the families or their fortunes, they might turn on him and say, your time's up. And it could be the security services. It could be the military. It could be the oligarchs we were just talking about. So, I think he is very worried about that. And I think that's what's behind some of these strange deaths that have occurred among some of the elite who maybe they were getting ready to do something. And he got wind of it, and they suffered the consequences. So he's getting pressure from the West. He's getting pressure from the people in the street, and he's getting pressure from those around him. So he's not in a very good place.
Jim, I just want to get your insight into the Ukraine side of things, because it's absolutely fascinating to speak to you on this. Are Ukraine still getting the support that they need? I'm talking weapons-wide from the West.
They are, and I think the issue, though, is how long will that last? And, in fact, Ukrainian parliamentarians are in Washington today meeting with their counterparts on our Congress and others to try to make the case that this war has got to be supported for the long term, that it's not even halfway over is what they're saying, and that even when the fighting stops and if they're able to get the Russians out of Ukraine, the fear is that Russia will still be there. So how can the West help Ukraine remain strong and prepared no matter what the situation may be 5 years from now? So I think right now Ukraine is getting a lot of what it needs, not everything. There's some systems that the U.S. has been still debating, and they haven't gotten aircraft. But they've gotten now some UK HIMARS-like systems. They've gotten the HIMARS from the U.S. We're going to give them 4 more. The Germans have just delivered some self-propelled artillery as well. So they're getting what they need, the basics. But what we have to do, though, is help to provide the ammunition, the expendables, things that are used up on the battlefield. UK doing a lot of training, and that's critical as well. So I don't think they will ever get everything they need. Their needs are great, but we have to focus on keeping going and making sure that we don't lose heart over the next few months as we get into winter. That's what Putin wants.